Okay, we'll get started. Hello, thank you for coming. My name's Robert Reinhardt. As the slide shows, this is real-world comparisons of H.265 and H.264 compression. Specifically, it's H.265 and X.264 in the tests that I've been doing. And this is actually an ongoing session that I've been giving. Dan always makes me change the title so it looks different, but the whole point of this session is to sort of state the status of H.265 vis-a-vis X.265 and X.264. What's interesting is that, and it's probably no surprise, that it's getting better. X.265 is a codec which is freely available. Anyone can download it and compile it. There's lots of FFmpeg distributions out there, and I should mention that too. I'm using FFmpeg as the demuxer and encoder, behind the scenes in addition to these libraries. I'm seeing a steady trend to better quality, smaller file sizes, and faster encode times. And oddly, that's something I'll report later, the latest compile I did with X.264 significantly increased times. And I don't know if that's the update to my operating system, which I presumably would have affected both encodes, but X.264 suffered a lot in my last test, performance-wise. I mean, the quality was exactly the same, and I'll go into some of that momentarily. So let's talk about the good news. I already sort of covered this, but I'll just go through it to make sure I didn't miss anything. It does live up to the hype. From a 30,000-foot level, where you're going to see the same quality at a lower bit rate, or conversely, smaller files at, at the same bit rate, you're going to see a significant difference in quality between X.264 and X.265. The file size ratio is actually getting close to 2.2 to 1. And it will vary from one piece of content to the next, and depending on how you're compressing, of course, it's very difficult to do apples for apples comparisons, and I've tried to keep my test parameters the same starting last year. Actually, I started this session May of last year, so this is the fourth time delivering this session, and the numbers keep getting better. I didn't have to update this 2 to 1 because this 2 to 1 is pretty stable now from May, but before that, you could see there it wasn't quite 2 to 1. In my very first test, and that's why I had the strike through, it was 1.5 to 1, 1.64 to 1, and that's comparing 264 to 265. And another update, when I first gave this talk over a year ago, it was still questionable whether or not there were going to be royalties for HEVC content, and at least with the first patent pool, right? This is the problem now with H.265 with respect to MPEG-LA, is that there's now yet another patent pool, and it's unclear now what that's going to do to the equation. I'm hoping that it's not, I'm a big fan of what I've seen so far. I don't know how many people were on that panel about emerging tech with Chris Knowlton and Colleen Henry, and that was an interesting, lively conversation. Colleen, of course, came from is at Facebook now, was at Google before that, where she, really got ingrained with VP9. So I'm not really trying to say anything about VP9. It's worth mentioning, again, in the context of this conference, that there are lots of options as we move forward, and it's it's hard to say if anyone's going to be a quote-unquote winner. This isn't like some HD DVD versus Blu-ray kind of contest. I think it's all about what you need to do with your content and why. And I'll make the case for where I think HEVC is going to make the biggest difference in certain production paths. But the no royalties, at least for the content, that's big, because right now with H.264, if you're, I'm a fan of the underdog. Obviously there's so many different groups that need video online and need to monetize it, right? It's still a proving grounds. It can small to medium-sized business or niche content producers make money in this business, compared to broadcasters and anyone else who's licensing studio and Hollywood content. That's a known pipeline for making money and monetizing it online with OTT. I think what's interesting, are the opportunities for new players to hit the stage with their own content. I have a personal interest. It sounds silly, but one day I want to make fishing videos, right? I live in the Pacific Northwest. I want to, make a better class of fishing videos because, quite frankly, I don't think they really tell you how to fish in fishing shows, right? They don't really tell you what the secret is in most shows, and it's really just about product placement. So anyway, I always have an ear to the ground to sort of see, well, how can I do something in a cost-effective way? And a lot of my clients are small to medium-sized business. More and more come from enterprise these days, or from more established businesses that have proven monetization paths. But I think as we move forward, and even with the H.264 and AVC, it was a gray area. I brought up an example one time in a streaming media article I wrote, or a blog post a long time ago, about Louis C.K. producing his own show and selling it online. Did he pay H.264 royalties? Probably not. I'm not trying to pick on him, but he made money. He was doing per title sales with H.264 encoded content. He probably owed 2 cents per title, or whatever the licensing agreements are, and that would have been a few $1,000s, maybe even up to $10,000. That's so just it's good to keep that in mind, right? I mean, and it's these kind of royalties are very much an honor-based system. It's like paying taxes. I mean, it doesn't mean you won't be audited, right? Someone can come after you if they think you're making enough money and you've made a big enough splash. Then chances are, these are a reality for you at a certain point. And but I do think it's funny that I often will bring up licensing arguments during conversations with any of my clients that are looking at revisiting their encoding flow. So it's not something that we can just put to the wayside. And of course, you can start learning about H.265 today and experimenting with it. I mean, if you want to hit the ground running once it becomes a reality, like, don't wait for that day to come. Start now so that you sort of know what you're doing. And hopefully that's what I can disseminate some of that to you today. So, of course, there's always some good news, bad news with the good news. And again, you'll see strike-throughs where I've changed the presentation because things are getting better. So there are longer encoding times, but they're not as bad as they used to be. When I first downloaded the first build of H.265, there was a 5-to-1 real-time ratio for HD on this particular machine. I've kept this machine constant as well. I could get a faster machine, but I wanted to leave things as many things constant. The operating system can be a big influence on how processes are running, and that may have affected some of my skewed results, because that was the only big change I made on this darn machine, and I'm sort of regretting it a little bit in terms of this talk. And I am going to make an effort after the conference is done to run more tests because of this abnormal H.264. And I didn't really post those results in this slide, but I'll go through them after I'm done with my deck here. So typically on this machine, I was seeing better than real-time encoding with H.264. That wasn't the case with the latest batch, the latest build of H.264 that I downloaded. I don't know, maybe they're in cahoots. Maybe the teams are like, hey, let's push more H.265. Okay, we'll make it perform worse. I have no idea. But there has been continued reductions with H.265, which is great. It doesn't take as long to encode. And it has, without any change perception-wise with the quality there. For playback, though, unless you're dealing with chipsets that are optimized for HEVC, you're going to see more CPU utilized for H.265. And again, this is my quad-core i7 in terms of the metrics I was taking here. I haven't really seen much improvement in the decode area of things, at least on this laptop with VLC as the player. And of course, they're the concern, and this is the same concern I would have with anyone who's advocating software decodes of VP9 on a mobile device, is battery life, right? Like Colleen proposed that during that session, and I guess for YouTube and Facebook, the two properties she has worked with, you're talking about 2 to 3 minute videos, maybe an average length. So you're not, if you're just sort of watching a video here and there before you're charging your phone up, then it's not a big deal. But if you're doing a Netflix, any feature length film or even a TV show, with the software decode, you're going to probably exhaust that battery a lot more quickly than you would otherwise if there was some GPU in there. So that's still, I mean, Apple, of course, is shipping HEVC in the newer iPhones, and they have been, I think, for at least the last couple releases. So that's good news, right? Because if we have GPU acceleration for this, then that's going to really save on the battery life. But I'm still making the assertion, as I did over a year ago, that it is tomorrow's tech. I don't think it's something you have to rush out after this session or after this conference and start, phoning up your encoding pipeline engineers and saying, we have to change this like right now. We are behind the times. Like it's just not there yet. Again, I think there's certain use cases that you can start to investigate. But the fact that I have yet to see a new build of H.265 where it's stable, where I haven't seen continued reductions. And and these are significant reductions, right? They're not just marginal reductions in time for encode. And that's usually what I'm looking at, is time for encode. If you don't have those kind of concerns, you've got, but I don't know anyone who would intentionally say, oh, I want it to take longer to encode. Yeah, can you please make it go longer? If it goes faster and you get a reasonable quality out of it, then that's great. I also how many people went to Jan's session this morning about adaptive streaming and coming up with adaptive groups? Jan Ozer's session in the main room. A couple of you did. I actually downloaded that and purchased with his coupon code. I know Jan, and all of you got that same coupon code. If you for this tool, and I'll show it. It runs on Windows only, so I have it running on VMware here. But a tool to do some more objective analysis, so it's not just the subjective analysis that I've been doing in past sessions. So that's sort of new for this session too. And of course, the biggest thing about tomorrow's tech is really the codec being available. I mean, it's interesting to see, especially on desktop, more and more videos going to mobile, but depending on what sessions you've been to, you might have heard numbers like 20%. I think it was maybe it was Will Law in that session who was talking about 20% of the views are still on desktop, and those are largely flash-based. I really think who's ever going to be responsible for being that fallback for H.265? Because I can guarantee you we're not going to see H.265 in all the browsers, right? Even the new browsers, right? So it's going to be a long path. I mean, it took us how long to see H.264 hit Firefox? I mean, it was H.264 has been out for a long time. Are we going to have to see that same length of time for H.265 to hit a browser like Firefox? Maybe. We'll see. The licensing for H.265, it's not so much about content and selling content, but it does I'm pretty sure the onus of royalty payments is on encode and decode. So who's ever getting the decoder out there is going to be paying MPEG-LA a lot of money to do it, right? And who's going to be the loss leader there, right? Adobe was willing to take one for the team. I think, everyone poo-poos Flash, but they put a lot of money out there to make a ubiquitous player that was a fallback even to this day, and we don't have anyone really willing to step up to be that fallback for any codec yet. I mean, right now, H.264 is the fallback to H.265, so maybe Flash will continue to be around or will continue its life as long as there's no fallback for the codec of the future. If DivX steps up, and DivX is the only plugin right now that I know of that has H.265 encoding capabilities, maybe DivX is going to be the new Flash, right? In the sense that they'll take the responsibility of being that vehicle for being the normalizer for the field, so that we don't have to encode in so many different codecs. It may not become such a big deal to encode in N levels of codecs, right? Like, just add it to the mix. Okay, we're going to encode this one next. Oh, there's another one coming tomorrow. Fine, we'll add that to it. But most pipelines don't. The Xbox keynote was all about reduction, right? Like, because you're going to save money the less you have to do, right? The more you have to do, the less return on investment you're going to get. It's less money that you're keeping in your bank, and you're giving to someone else's. So how can we test H.265 today? Well, I'm a geek, so compiling, and especially on a Mac. I mean, come on, if you have a Mac, you don't have to have like some computer science degree to compile software. You download Xcode, it's free. You follow a few tutorials online. Sure, you might spend an hour, you might spend a couple hours if you've haven't upgraded something or another. But if you have a Mac, it's super easy to compile software, and you'll feel pretty good at the end of the day when you do, because like when there's a new change, you don't have to wait for Telestream or someone else to put it into their product. You could do it instantly whenever you're ready to do it, and it's going to be rewarding that way. You know, you're going to want VLC player. I still can't play H.265 files natively like in QuickTime. I can't just drag them. I don't get thumbnails for H.265 files. You know, that it's not part of an integrated, you know, even on an operating system level. So you'll need VLC player or something with an H.265 decoder. VLC's easy enough to get on any, you know, the major operating systems. So go out, and that's what I'm going to be using today. And you know, I would honestly say if you are looking for an archive format, if you're processing files now and you're looking to reduce storage space, I would honestly, like Colleen was mentioning in her case, if you're building something now, then by all means you should be looking at all your options. And H.265, even if it's not the delivery codec you use, you could use it as a better mezzanine format than H.264. Even if they haven't worked out all the performance issues with it. Here are my testing specifications. I updated everything this weekend to rerun the battery of tests that I've been running. Again, this is the fourth time I've been running this session. And these are the specs of what I've tested against. Again, I don't know what happened between, I was testing on Core 146 with H.264 back in May. They're now at Core 148, and you know, several minor releases down from that. And it just behaved horribly on this machine. And I even recompiled. I did some stuff even early this morning just to confirm. So now it's time to get into some demos, and this is just where, you know, you'll see this in the exhibit floor. After this session ends, you're going to be able to go get some free booze and enjoy yourself. So you'll see different vendors comparing it. And again, I updated this presentation within the last few hours just to take some of the stuff that I even gleaned from Jan's session. He was talking about, he was noticing super fast as a preset being used for H.264, you know, giving the best bang for buck. So I ran a super fast preset. If you're not familiar with the presets around H.264, they apply to H.265 as far as I can tell as well. But it just, you know, is a batch of parameters that, you know, are going to either reduce or increase the amount of encoding time, usually at the expense of quality, right? So the faster it goes, the less quality you're going to get. Bit rate might not be as optimized, and things like that. So without further ado, I'm just going to show some visual samples, and then I'll go into that Moscow University tool that Jan was showing during his session, just to show you some real results that happened just as a result of the latest round of testing that I did over the weekend and today. So this is the file I'm about to play here. This is a reduced from a 1920 by 816 movie trailer. I like you, and this also dates my session. I'm using the same clip. It's the X-Men Days of Future Past or whatever that release was. So it's that same trailer, and I also used a trailer for God's Pocket. So I've been consistent using those two trailers. I specifically picked one because it had slower, the colors were more muted in God's Pocket. There's a lot more vibrancy in the X-Men, a lot more quick cuts, explosions, and stuff like that really would, you know, test an encoder. So I like these two clips because, you know, I don't have a talking head clip. That's probably the thing I should, you know, add to this mix later. But without further ado, I'm going to play. This is reduced to a 1280 by dimension from the 1920 original, and this is H.264. You can even see in the title if you can squint, CRF 21, so the default CRF value, constant rate formula, or it's constant quality that we see with that. And this took 50 seconds to encode on this machine using super fast as the preset. So let's go ahead and play that.
Professor?
You're gonna find this hard to believe.
I was sent here for you.
From the future?
50 years from now.
Could you give me that one more time, please?
Stay with me.
In the beginning, the Sentinels were just targeting mutants. Then they began targeting everyone. I've come a long way to guide us, to bring us together.
So I won't play the whole thing. I just wanted to play 20 seconds or so of it. So that looks pretty good, right? It's CRF21. That's like, the default value for, acceptable quality with H.264. And that encoded in 50 seconds. And let's just get the file size real quick on that. Let me just go by modified because that was the last encode I did on this box. So that was at CRF21 720p, that was 62.7 megabytes, right? For a trailer that's just over 2 minutes, right? So we're seeing better than real-time performance in terms of the encode because I use super fast. And that quality was, I thought, pretty amazing given it was the super fast preset. The default is medium, right? And so now I'm going to play you a file, and I'm just going to give it away. It's 28.5 megabytes, right? Less than half the size of 62.7. This is H.265, latest build, CRF21, and it took slightly longer, 83 seconds. And if you compound that for longer length videos, it's going to add up, but it's not nearly as bad as it was. It's getting better and better. So I'm going to play that now. So again, that's substantially small file size.
Professor?
You're gonna find this hard to believe.
I was sent here for you.
From the future?
50 years from now.
Could you give me that one more time, please?
Stay with me.
In the beginning, the Sentinels were just targeting mutants. Then they began targeting everyone. They've come a long way to guide us, to bring us together. The X-Men. We need your help.
Tell whoever...
Okay, so, there's it's hardly lossless, right? There's definitely some compression artifacts that you can see even with the light scatter on the screen here. And again, there's a Windows-only tool. I'm gonna have to unlock my screen here on my Windows VM. And so this MSU, the VQMT, or the Video Quality Measurement Tool, it's roughly $1,000. You can get a $50 discount code from Jan. He probably tweeted it already or something like that. But it actually, will take an original and you can compare up to 2 renditions to that original. The only drawback with this tool, and he mentioned it during his session, is that they have to be the same resolution. You can't compare a 720 to a 1080. So I did have to make sure that the analysis was as lossless as possible. I had to take the 1920 original trailer and I just output it to ProRes with lossless quality there from FFmpeg, and that was a super fast transmux to that. But here's the graph that came out. This is actually, this is the last one that I just did. Right, yep, 720p. I'm just looking at the file names. And so the idea with this scale is that lower is better. So the closer we see these numbers down to the bottom, the better the quality has been. And you'll see that there's obviously some spikes above. We generally want it to be below 1. I want to say 0.8 or lower is going to be a decent score for this metric. Jan can comment more on that if you talk to him about it. But the point here is that, look, the metrics are super close. Those lines, the red is really close to the blue, right? We're not seeing huge gaps even on the magnified view. So these 2 files, as far as the objective analysis with the view, we were using VQM as the metric selection, and that's, Jan has written extensively on some of this stuff. He just released an interview with one of the lead architects of this tool on streammedia.com. You can see that, again, the differences are marginal. And you're probably, and it will even save what it calls bad frames, where it starts to deviate from the original. It will extract those frames, and you can see some of them are there on my desktop from previous tests. I started to organize them in folders. You have a question in the back, please? Oh, good point. So if you look at the legend, if you can read it, the first processed one, so the red line is the H.264, and the blue line is the H.265. So then I'll just confirm that. Yep. So the first file I have is the H.264 there, and the second file is the 265. So the red line is H.264, the blue line is H.265. So the blue does, it depends, it's not exactly always above or below with one or the other. You'll see that, especially in this magnified view, the blue is higher in certain segments. If I think I can even drag this, and go on this section right here, we can see that the blue is, spiking above it. But again, is that a significant threshold? It may or may not be, compared to some of these other spots. And, I can even have it show the frame at that particular point in time. And that doesn't necessarily look like a frame. What the heck is that? Oh, it's scaling it. That's like during a transition, it looks like that it's pointing to that frame. And if I go like maybe up to here where there's more another pronounced difference, let's see if that frame is any different. So, again, it's good to use this. When you go through this tool, what's interesting is that, what it points at, where it sees these quality differences may not be significant areas of interest. Jan pointed that out in his session too. If he showed a magnified view of 400% from a grab from the movie Elektra, and who's going to be the stakeholder or product owner that says that, oh my gosh, that's just horrible, we can't go with that quality. Yes, another question. Oh, well, in this example, I'm using CRF. I'm a big fan of CRF, and in my own encoding formulas, I'll use what I call a constrained CRF. So I'll constrain the VBV buffer size with CRF to make sure it works better with CBR strategies. So it's sort of a not so VBR, I guess you could say. But for this test, this is CR. So you can tell it is. The bit rates is varied on this. If I open up I'll show you the screen grab. So I did another one though where I did use constant bit rate as the metric to compare, and I'm going to show you that one next. So let me bring that up here, make sure I've got the right one. I did a couple. So you'll see that the files, I know they're small, but the file size difference is marginal. One's 12.8 meg, the other's 12.4 meg. And so I'm going to show you at 500 kilobits H.264, and the graphs will look different when you see this too. So this is H.264 at 500 kilobits. So again, I scaled it down a bit so it just was easier to show here. But the quality is intentionally reduced here, right?
Professor?
You're gonna find this hard to believe.
I was sent here for you.
From the future?
50 years from now.
So while it's playing, I don't need the audio this time. So, I often find that a test of a good encoding test intentionally throttles bitrate. Like, how does it perform when you give it a lot less bytes to work with? So this is 500 kilobits on the video data rate for H.264. And we weren't trying to avoid artifacting here. So you can just see that there's during the transitions on Hugh Jackson's forehead there, you saw quite a bit of noise. And as we go through this, and I'm going to pause it there. And just on that same clip, same bit rate. Again, it's slightly bigger. It came out with 0.4 meg higher on the file size, but I would say fairly insignificant difference with the bit rate. And we're going to play that same one as H.265. And you're going to notice that the quality is a lot better. I mean, this is the same bit rate and marginally higher. Well, again, I won't say it's marginally, but higher encode time on this. But the quality I'm getting at 500K is remarkably better. I mean, it's just I don't think there's any dispute of that in at least these samples that I'm showing you. So I would actually say that's pretty acceptable, especially for 720p at 500K. That's pretty amazing. Would I release that? I'd probably use a higher bit rate than that. But yet you could imagine if you even gave it 1.5 megabits, you'd probably be better than what you perceive Netflix to be right now at 1.5 megabits, right? I honestly don't think Netflix has the best quality for encoding, but I don't watch Netflix to see the sharpest picture, right? I don't have a 4K House of Cards, machine setup going. So, and I'm going to show you, I have it here in Photoshop, that 500K. I don't want to rerun the analysis. That's one thing I haven't figured out yet. I'll have to ask Jan that, like if you can load CSV files. Let me make sure I've got the right, here it is. Here's the 500. So here's the 500 metric, and I expected to see a little bit more of a difference, but this is where clearly they're not overlapping. The H.264, and let me try and scale that up a bit so you can see, there we go, that's better. Get to the hand tool. So this is just a screenshot I did of it. But clearly now they're not right on top of each other. Consistently, the red line is H.264, and remember, higher is worse. So we can clearly see there's a quality difference here, even with the can't even say that darn acronym, VQM. With that scale, the H.264 output is noticeably different than the H.265. Especially in the parts where it's difficult. If I were to bring up these frames again, I mean, I don't have it loaded. This is a screen grab. I can't control it. So, but if I were to bring up those frames, again, it's probably those significant areas where there's differences, notably here. You know, any of the complex scenes, H.265 handled it better than H.264 did. And again, Apple's trying to keep the bit rate constrained to 500 kilobits there on that. So, you know, slight differences can't, you know, slight differences in, you know, it's not quite a Richter scale, but, you know, you're not going to see like huge gaps in this chart between H.264 and H.265. But you will, if you compare it to other analyses that you've done with this tool, you'll see significant differences for the same bit rate. So it depends what you're trying to go after. If you're trying to, you know, use the same bit rate but get higher quality, then you're going to obviously see differences with H.265. If you're trying to reduce file size and keep quality as the same metric, then you're going to see differences there as well. Yes? That's a good question. Honestly, I mean, I tend, you know, and at the end of the day, stakeholders or product owners, whatever you want to call them, with the organizations that I work with, it almost always boils down to a subjective decision, right? They're going to look at the video, right? And they're going to, depending on how big their catalog is, and again, this is why I'm a big fan of CRF and you know, when I do my adaptive groups, I don't do static adaptive groups with any encoding that I'm in control of. I think every piece of content is different, and these days you should have sophisticated enough engineers and encoding platforms that if I give it an NFL clip with a lot of movement in it, then that clip needs more bit rate. I'm sorry, like it just needs more bit rate. If I give it a talking head clip, don't use the same preset on it. That's just ridiculous. Like, you should have content-aware systems for encoding. The encoders are built around that these days. At least H.264 and H.265 both have that. And like I said, you can constrain buffer sizes so that you've got more of a CBR look and feel, so that your adaptive switching is more or less on the same page. Are you going to have every chunk equally sized? Probably not, but even in CBR workflows, you're not going to have every chunk exactly the same size. This is not the way encoding usually works. You want it to be relatively in the same ballpark. So that's how, you know, and I actually think as the technology, you know, as HTTP streaming technologies improve, I'm seeing that the way packets get queued up from even HLS manifests, right? If I have a few small chunks, well, it's going to still try and queue more behind the scenes. So if I've got a few smaller ones because the bigger one's coming down the pipe, well, at the end of the day, it's still going to be about my average bandwidth, right? And so that, you know, hopefully that switch is going to work well. It's not going to always throw it off, but not all HLS renderers are created the same. You know, obviously, if you've built something in Flash to render HLS, or you've built something in, as Jeff Tapper before me was talking about, if you're doing JavaScript transmuxing of packets on the fly, well, there's all sorts of variables that can affect how well smoothness is going to, you know, equate to quality of experience there. So I know that I got away from your question there, but I honestly couldn't tell. I mean, what's interesting is that this tool does report more detail than what you'll just visually see in this graph in CSV files. In fact, let me see if I can load one of those up real quick just to show you. If you didn't have the benefit of going to Jan's session, here's the one where it's comparing, this was the CRF with superfast. I'm just going to try and see if I can open that in Excel real quick here. And Excel's probably going to open with every other Excel document I opened in the last 5 days, including passwords that I don't want you to see. So let me just close all this stuff. There it goes. This is the file that it created. And it's not as clean as some of the other, I mean, Jan cleaned this stuff up when he was showing it. and this doesn't actually look as clean as I was hoping it to be. It's breaking it down, but it's literally going through it frame by frame, right? So I can see the quality number. It's giving me the number of each number of the class. I thought it gave the standard deviation. Maybe I had to put that into the output for the CSV file, but there's the average. I mean, it's showing me that there's an average of 0.46 and 0.48. So for those two, and again, this was for CRF, right? So the file sizes were substantially different. I apologize that that's so small. Let me increase the point size here to show you that. So the average VQM coming out of the H.264 file was 0.46. The average coming out of the H.265 file was 0.48. Remember, lower is better. So, trying to keep the CRF value the same for these. But again, I mean, I could probably bump the CRF down a little bit. I don't think CRF exactly plays out the same way with H.265 as it does with H.264, at least in my analysis it hasn't. Because I mean, do I need to have that much reduction in file size? How much reduction am I comfortable with, right? So my chances are I can get this to 0.46 on the H.265 and not see that much increase in the file size, right? So I would say, 0.02 of a difference in this scale is probably not as, obviously a 1/10 of a point is going to be a lot more significant than 1/100th of a point. So, but again, I think when Jan was pressed on the issue too, the other tool he was showing, which is 2 to 3 times more expensive than this tool, it's a lot. It comes out with some better subjective numbers and better scales for you to reference, but it's a more expensive tool to do it. What I'd like to see, this can be run from the command line though, which I like, but it's Windows only, which I don't like. So you could feasibly introduce this tool into an encoding workflow. I think the more expensive tool, I can't even remember the name, pardon, SQM or something. The vendor's here on the trade floor, and there's a $100 discount from Jan that he arranged with them for that tool. But I think they do have a Linux version of it, which would be great. So if you're doing some kind of cloud-based encoding workflow, and that was a question put to Jan during his session. It's like, well, can you use results like this to then tailor, like if it doesn't come out, that you would just automate, okay, let's, reduce it until we get a value that we like, and, sort of have some kind of quality control built into the system. A lot of the fancy commercial encoding systems like Harmonic and Procoder, is that Rosette's, what Rosette made and Harmonic bought, it had controls like that in its workflow where, if you wanted it to resubmit based on an analysis coming out of it, but that's an even more expensive tool, right? I mean, as an encoding product, you're talking, upwards of $5,000 to $15,000 for that commercial product. I'm not saying it's not worth it, but what I find interesting is that people, and I did an FFmpeg session yesterday, an afternoon workshop on it, and it was really more of an intro to intermediate class on FFmpeg, but there are established forces in enterprise, I don't want to make it sound like the military industrial complex, that treat FFmpeg like it's like not like up to, who would use that in production, right? Every startup I know uses FFmpeg in production. So, I mean, sure, maybe big banks and, people who want people they can sue if their software breaks down aren't going to use FFmpeg, but it's surely a tool that can give you results. And I can tell you without any doubt that any client of mine that's doing live streaming is using libraries from FFmpeg in their native apps and stuff like that. So, I mean, the elements of FFmpeg, and there are, the FFmpeg maintains a list of violators to their, GPL on their site, or at least they used to, and, some of them may or may not even be on that show floor. So I'm not going to name names. I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble. Like, I'm all for people knowing what tools are out there and make the best, there's so many different variables that go into that tool selection. It's not even funny, but I don't think anyone should, at this point in the game, just like, no one should make fun of VP9, right? I mean, it's got some solid benefits over, right now it's license free. I mean, there might be someone who tries to say that there's some, we live in America. There's always a chance for a lawsuit to happen. It doesn't matter who's right or who's wrong. If you got enough money, you can sue someone, right? That's just how it works. So, it's like it's a risk-reward scenario, right? So, I think there was, I did want to just show a couple more samples, and I'll continue to take questions, of course. By no means, I might even let us out a few minutes early so you can, be ready. They usually delay the beer and the wine a little bit, like even if you're right on time. So, I don't want to be the cause that, like, you didn't, get to have as much fun as you wanted to. Okay, so I just wanted to show, and I'll make that quick comment. Like you'll see, I built these shell scripts to run through this battery of tests that I do, and it was insane. Like when the difference I was seeing with H.264, I don't know what happened with the build. Like I said, I'm going to spin up some Linux instances and compile FFmpeg from scratch just to run some of these shell scripts there on some decent sized instance on EC2, but that's Amazon's AWS cloud offering. But you'll see, like, where's the, when I was doing bitrate constraints, like I wasn't seeing significant differences with H.264's performance. Like this encode took 137 seconds to finish on my machine. But I kid you not, look at this CRF one, took longer than the H.265. I'm sorry, it's a little, can I zoom in on that? Woo. Come on, blow up. How come my Mac's not doing the blow up thing? It must have changed it in this damn El Capitan. Anyway, I haven't enabled it or disabled it, but it's 496 seconds. So that was more than 2 times the duration of the file to do a CRF21 on that with H.264. It was actually less time to do it with 265. So I don't, unless there's some regressive bug came into H.264 with some of the latest commits to the GitHub repo, I don't know what's happening there. Like I've just never seen CRF take that long with H.264 on this machine. So something's up there. I have a feeling that, I mean, if I see it on a Linux instance on the cloud too, then I don't know. I'm going to have to report it to the authorities or something because that's just not right. Something happened there, but it was significantly longer. But I did want to show one more. I'm just going to show. And I also did, just to sort of do some more tests. I know it was some feedback I got the very first time I did this. Well, did you try running H.264 with like very slow to see if you got the same file size reduction with the quality retention that you would have with H.265? And the answer to that was no. And even here, you can see that for this CRF21, I ran a very slow preset, which takes significantly longer, 2,577 seconds. Like, took a long time for that code to include. Only shaved 7 meg off the file, not even a 6 meg, just roughly over 6 megabytes were shaved off this file. It still came nowhere close to what I could get with H.265, right, in a significantly less amount of time. So, but there's a case for that now too. I mean, I've made the point in past sessions when I've delivered this that anyone, if you put your H.264 encoding pipeline in place years ago, like even 3 years ago, chances are you could improve that H.264 pipeline today, right? I mean, if you're not using H.264, maybe you're using main concept or some other codec, you can probably make improvements, and that's really not the focus of this session today. It was more to focus on H.264 and H.265. But don't necessarily judge your H.264 pipeline today if it was built several years ago, because chances are the decisions and options that were available then aren't the same options that would affect your decision making today. Having said that, if you're reevaluating your encoding pipeline today, I think you would be foolish for not considering VP9 or HEVC, or even both. I mean, clearly for Google, it's someone mentioned it in a previous session, either at East or West last year. For Google, it's a no-brainer to use VPN on YouTube, right? Because it doesn't matter if everyone adopts it. If everyone's using Chrome, or if I shouldn't say everyone, if they have a significant audience segment using Chrome, going to YouTube, and they're going to give them VP9 content, which is going to be significantly smaller than H.264 content, then that's a no-brainer for Google, right? It saves them a ton of money in bandwidth, just with YouTube alone, right? So, and so is YouTube going to try and, is Google going to try and convince other people to use it? Sure, why not? They've already invested in it. If they can get more people to use it, but is it, like I said, it's not a Blu-ray versus HD DVD. Just because like HEVC wins out, if it ever does win out, doesn't mean VP9's dead, right? It just means fewer people are using it, right? And the people that have the volume that need it and can, prove the ROI for that investment for encoding resources as well as storage of it. But that's all getting cheaper and cheaper, right? We know that CPU costs are going down, storage costs are going down, everything's getting cheaper, and good thing, because we're about to hit a mountain of cost when it comes to 4K. If you're because we're just going to we keep resetting the bar. It just happens that way, right? Just when we think SD, we've got it nailed, HD comes out. Oh man, we got to do with this all over again. Now with 4K, just when we thought we've got things dialed in, I honestly think that the HDR 1080p is a really nice value proposition, more so than 4K. But again, it's going to be about content. You could probably remaster more content to HDR if it was shot on film or something like that, but that's not what this session's about either. I did say I wanted to show God's Pocket, so without further ado, I'm just going to show you one more sample. I won't show the whole thing, but it's just a different sample, and this is just to show you a different type of file. And let me make sure this is relevant. There's okay, I'm going to bring this. This is H.264, and this is 1080p, or well, 1920 across. This is H.264. I'm not even going to play the audio, but just a much more muted color palette, smoother transitions. There's not, trailers are trailers. There's always fast cuts or fast dissolves with trailers because that's the nature of a trailer. But my point here is just more that the color tones and the color palette that are in this, it's different. It's a lot more, not that the X-Men footage wasn't moody, but this was H.264, and again, file size wise, again, just consistency in the sense that this was it wasn't quite 2:1, this was 59.3 megabytes, and the H.265 was 27.9, but again, you're just going to see, you're not going to notice a substantial subjective quality difference now between that, considering that we shaved a good 20, 25 megabytes off the size of this file. It will add up in terms of your storage costs and your transfer costs. I honestly think there's a real case for live streaming. Wowza development is a lot of what I do for my clients. I do custom Wowza development, and an ingest of an HEVC live stream going out to a transcoded H.264 live stream makes a lot of sense because you've probably noticed your bandwidth has been compromised while you've been here with all these people. It's not super fast internet at a conference like this. It never is. So if you're trying to live stream in a stadium or anywhere where there's a lot of competition for the bandwidth out, it's again a no-brainer for me to think that HEVC is going to do that. And it's a real-world use case. One of my clients in Canada, where I now live in British Columbia, does hockey streaming for essentially minor league hockey up there. And there's really remote locations where they don't have gigabit pipes coming into these arenas, right? They're lucky if they've got even a meg and a half up, right? So that's a huge difference in quality, especially for fast action sports. Hockey's not exactly slow, and so to use an HEVC encoder on site there, it's funny. I won't name names, but one of the disruptors, as I will call it, for H.264 live encoding. I asked, are you guys going to be doing H.265 anytime soon? And he was just like, we don't see the business case for it. I'm like, how can you not see the business case for this? Like, I mean, do you know what you're talking about? Like, I just thought it was really interesting because that's something where you don't need to depend so much on the codec consumption, right? You're talking about a very customized pipeline to your cloud infrastructure, whatever it may be, whether it's Wowza or something else. But Wowza even now supports and preview H.265 in HLS, so you can test that today with Wowza as a transmux. So you could have H.265 coming in, presumably coming in. I tried a year ago to do an FFmpeg RTMP in, or no, an RTSP in. Can't remember. Either way, I couldn't get Wowza to quite transmux H.265 to H.264. I could get FFmpeg to do it. I could have it, push H.265 out, or set it up to ingest and then put out H.264 as well, but wasn't quite able to do it. So I'm looking forward to that equation materializing. You don't have to, if you're in live production, you don't have to wait for things like that. You don't have to wait for H.265 adoption on mobile devices, right? Because we're talking about a completely different equation there. We're talking about just getting better quality over a small pipe, and you're going to be able to do that with H.265. And based on what I'm seeing with the enhancements with X265 as a library, it's getting better and better. I mean, especially for CPU loads. I think the problem is probably still the chipset. We need to start seeing these encoding boards come out with H.265 support. I know Elemental has it, but we need a disruptor to really do it. Someone who can come out with a cost point under $1,000 to have a small piece of hardware that you can use on site to transmit H.265. That's probably going to push that segment along very nicely. I'll leave the last 10 minutes for questions, and if there are no questions, we'll just end early. So let me pull up my deck here just to, I don't think I'm missing anything that I wanted to cover other than to thank you, of course, for staying for my session. And I'll just go back to my title slide there. Or actually my contact information. I'll put that up so that you can jot it down. I am usually really generous with my time. I mean, I don't know if I'm as generous as Dan Rayburn. I'm not just going to start tweeting my cell phone number, but it's pretty easy to find too if you want to find my cell number. But any questions that haven't already been asked? Yes?
Are these videos you're using are all main profiles for comparison?
Oh, that's a good point. I'm pretty sure the source was main profile. I mean, they were Apple encoded trailers, right? So I just grabbed them from apple.com whenever they were released. The X26, again, I'm happy to share my shell scripts if you want to see exactly what I'm doing. But and just send me an email to remind me to put them up somewhere. I can give them to Dan. I think Stream Media can store more than just PDF files on the repository that they send out, or where they store their files. So I'm more than happy to. It's not, it's not like there's any secret sauce in there. But I can tell you that the default is going to be high profile. So X264's default's high profile, and I can even just bring up. I still have the terminal up here for the last encode I was doing. I wasn't specifying a profile with H.265. But it was using main for X265. So X264 was using high, which, again, I don't know. Again, is it apples for apples to say main profile of X265 is like the same quality tier as main for X264? It's hard to say, but or maybe it's not so hard to say. But that's what I tried to just stick with the defaults because I felt that even if they changed the defaults. And I did check that, by the way. I took the encode, I'm still trying to figure out why X264 took so much longer to run this time. And I even ran that comparison test to see if they were exactly the same. Like they were marginally different, like super tight, those lines between X264 in May versus today. So as far as frame by frame analysis with CRF21, exactly the same output. I don't know why it took so much longer to do it. So very strange. And I even looked at the metadata because that's what's not, when you use FFmpeg, if you open up, I use media info on Mac, the switches were all the same. Reference frame counts, mixed frames. None of the defaults had changed. So, and I should have been snapshotting those, but luckily they're stored. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just in case you on the Mac, I love media info, but this is the two files that I have May's next to. Like, look at that. Back in May, same switches used in my shell script. 134 seconds to 496 seconds. That's a big difference, right? That's not just some aberration of just like, I had Skype open or something, right? And I always make sure I close everything. But if I look at the raw report, what I like about FFmpeg is that, it's gonna, if I go, the encoding settings are all gonna be right here, right? So I compared these to each other. I mean, I won't open it, but none of those were different. There was no difference in the motion estimation range. They're both 16. I thought, maybe they changed the default or something so that it was like 32 or 64, something insane. But it wasn't. It was exactly the same. So I honestly, other than something happened, I did see more warnings when I compiled H.264, but that's pretty common in open source software. When you're compiling, you'll see lots of warnings. It doesn't necessarily mean it won't compile. So I don't know. Maybe there's some error loop that was happening that just took it longer to get past it. I don't know. Yes?
Have you tested the other stack?
Oh, have I tried other vendors' codecs? I have not. I know. Well, I shouldn't say I haven't. I did play around with Vanguard's SDK, and I was impressed with that. And their tool's really nice, too, for comparison. I would certainly look at Vanguard. I don't want to say I've given up on other vendors when it comes to those stacks. I think every institution is going to be different in terms of how they're going to make a business decision. So if they have to make a decision where they're using a certain product line and that's the only option they have. I mean, I think it's great that vendors are adding H.264 and H.265 as an offering to their encoding product. It's just, again, the reality is that a lot of my clients are startups, and they're clearly not going to just go out and buy super expensive commercial encoding products. So that's just not the case. Am I open to it? Oh, well, I mean, I'm not going to say I have clients that are more enterprise that have established workflows, and I know changing the encoding software is not an option. So I will work with them with whatever encoder they've got to make it sing, right? So, and there's ways to do it. I mean, I was a big fan of Rosette Pro Media, or was it Pro Carbon? Back in 2 years ago, I was using that a lot on Windows-based farms, and I thought it was, that was main concept, and it didn't do a bad job. I mean, it's I've always been impressed with the CRF capabilities that H.264 and now H.265 have. So that's. Any other questions? Oh, you're like the question person. I love it. What's your next question? And that'll be the last one.
I'm more interested in understanding how to decide what CRF to use for tuning your specific application and how to figure out what works better.
Well, I mean, the whole idea with CRF is that you sort of have a relative scale for picking a quality, right? So that if I pick CRF 18, then I'm going to consistently see a same CRF 18 quality, a perception of that quality from one file to the next. Doesn't matter if it's a talking head or a sports clip, right? So maybe I don't understand the question. I mean, how do you decide which CRF number to use? Is that what you're asking? If you even read the docs on it, I mean, I think anything below 18, you're going to see marginal improvements. And I know that, I don't think Jan's done it, but now that I've spent the $950 on this Moscow tool, I'm going to probably do a lot more tests just to see where that deviation starts to not matter, right? But, if you want like super, like, near lossless quality and it's just super important that you have some peace of mind, then use some lower numbers. But those file sizes are going to start going up substantially and for very little gain, I would say, visually. So I know lots of people go use 20 just because I guess they feel they're a little better than the default. I don't know. But I've personally felt 21's perfectly fine for most content. Again, like if you're using online services right now as a comparison, I would say Netflix is like CRF 25 right now most of the time. I don't think they're that great quality when it comes to their encoding and for the bit rates they're using. They're probably getting better at it, and I don't know how they update their catalogs, right? If I'm watching Leave It to Beaver on Netflix, I mean, are they going back to Leave It to Beaver to make it better? I don't know. Again, it's probably, they're looking at the numbers. What's the most watched content? They're probably focusing on that. Their original series, like I'm sure House of Cards, gets a little bit more attention when it comes to the encoding than Leave It to Beaver does, right? Because it's SD. I'm watching it on a 1080 screen or higher these days. So, I think it's all relative to the input. And so it's hard to say. But I would say anywhere between 18 and 21 is going to be perfectly fine for 98% of use cases out there. And 18 is surely going to be bigger than 21, but, probably with significant visual change if you're looking for super sharp pictures.
I'm looking for the lowest possible file size without sacrificing quality too much.
Right. Well, and you'll probably be fine with the 21 or 20. I don't think you would even have to go below 20 with that. But I would say run some tests. I mean, again, it's when you're talking about that subjective skill, and again, like Jan was pointing out, like that doesn't always mean that there's not going to be one frame with one area where you've sort of, it's all about, the significant interest area that you're watching. Like if you start to see it break down, then chances are it's not going to be acceptable, right? So I don't know. It was really great. Sony demoed some stuff in the Discovery track with just their quality of service. Like if you increase the latency just by 1.5 seconds, like how much better the live stream was coming out of their camera, and it was awesome. I mean, that's just the kind of thing where it's just like, yeah, that's worth the trade-off because you just show me what it looks like when that is not on, and it's like it's a no-brainer, as some people would say. But anyway, I don't know if that answered your question, but we're not over 5. I promised you I wasn't going to keep you from the entertainment. So by all means, please if you haven't filled out the evals, please give some eval feedback to the conference. If you want to see more of these kind of sessions, it's really important. I will tell you that streaming media largely, thinks that this is very much a business audience, and if you want to see more tech how-tos, you got to let them know, because anytime I try to say I want to do advanced sessions, they'll be like, we don't need advanced sessions. So not everyone believes that. I'm just saying, please be vocal with your feedback. The more people that say they want a certain thing, it's just like encoding. The more eyeballs you got on it, the more attention it's going to get, and you're going to have to make it better. So please give them as much feedback as you can. And again, thank you.